Thus, race and social class play a role in American criminal cases, especially the capital punishment cases. Today's case raises deeply uncomfortable questions about the role of race and social class of both defendants and their victims in determining the punishments. I'm Angela Willis, and on today's episode of Women That Kill, we look at Virginia Christian, an African American girl who was convicted of killing Ida Virginia Below. This case is important because it gives us a glimpse of the experiences of some Southern working class Black women after the Civil War. Before we get started, make sure you subscribe and like this video. In order to understand this case, you must first understand the history, or else you won't understand the motive and subsequent punishment. Virginia, also known as Virgie, was born in 1895 in Hampton City, Virginia. Virginia was a former slave state. The state was split by the American Civil War in 1861, when Virginia's state government in Richmond joined the Confederacy. But many of the state's western counties remained loyal to the Union, helping form the state of West Virginia in 1863. During the post-war Reconstruction era, Virginia, like other former slave states, enacted Jim Crow laws, and in 1902 rewrote the state constitution to include a poll tax and other voter registration measures that effectively disenfranchised most African Americans and many poor whites. These laws lasted for almost 100 years. Essentially, Jim Crow laws was slavery, but by another name. Many southern states used former slave codes and took out the words slave and master and replaced them with Mr. and employee. Jim Crow laws influenced every aspect of African American lives. The laws outlined how African Americans and whites should interact. Blacks were punished if they called a white person, no matter their age, by their first name. It made it illegal for blacks and whites to interact or share accommodations like water fountains and public pools. Under Jim Crow, tens of thousands of African Americans were arrested, incurring outrageous fines for not having a job. Unable to pay these debts, blacks were sent to prisons where they were forced to work in coal mines, lumber camps, brickyards, railroads, and farm plantations for free. Thousands of African Americans were simply seized by Southern landowners and forced into years of involuntary servitude. Especially young Black men, Southern governments leased imprisoned blacks to farmers and corporations for cheap labor. Unlike slavery, employers had little invested in these leased convicts, so they were treated poorly. These laws gave whites legal rights to beat their Black employees and poor white employees, especially children. In addition to limited and restrictive work opportunities, access to schools and healthcare hurt African Americans for several generations. Around 1908, at the age of 13, Virgie began working for Ida Virginia Below, a 51-year-old white woman from Hampton, Virginia. Ida's family had been slave owners. Ida was known to frequently beat and yell at Virgie, which was allowed under Jim Crow laws at the time. In March 1912, an argument began between the two in which Ida accused Virgie of stealing a locket and a skirt. Ida hit Virgie with a spittoon, which is a metal container made for spitting into. It was mostly used by people who used chewing and dipping tobacco. I could not find if the container was full of spit or not, but it enraged Virgie. Both Virgie and Ida reached for two broom handles used to prop up bedroom windows. Virgie grabbed one of the broom handles and hit Ida on the forehead. To stop Ida's screams, Virgie stuffed a towel down Ida's throat, and the woman died by suffocation. Police soon arrested Virgie, and during questioning she admitted to hitting Ida but was shocked that Ida was dead. Virgie claimed she had no intent to kill Ida. Local newspapers covered the story at the time, but the overt racism was shocking. Even basic descriptions of Virgie were full of racist stereotypes. The following morning after the murder, the Newport News Daily described Virgie as a full-blooded negress with kinky hair done up in threads, with dark lusterless eyes and with splotches on the skin of her face. Her color is dark brown, and her figure is short, dumpy, and squashy. She has had some schooling, but her speech does not betray it. Her language is the same as the unlettered members of her race. Virgie's case was held in an Elizabeth City County court, but local white citizens demanded that the trial stop and Virgie be lynched. Nevertheless, the trial continued. Due to her poverty and age, the court assigned lawyers to represent the accused. Virgie was not allowed to defend herself or explain her actions during her trial. Rules at the time did not allow blacks to testify in court. The constant beatings from Ida were not taken into consideration or the evidence of self-defense. Therefore, Virgie was found guilty on April 9, 1912. One day after her 17th birthday, a short 5 months after the crime, Virgie case drew national attention. The governor of Virginia received numerous letters requesting clemency for Virgie, including a 1912 petition for clemency sent by Virgie's attorney. He explained that he could not put his client on the stand to testify in her own defense because he feared her words might provoke another outburst of courtroom violence, as had happened in Hillsville on March 14, 1912. The lawyer was referring to the trial of Floyd Allen, who was convicted of murder. When the judge sentenced him to death, Floyd stood up and said, "If you sentence me on that verdict, I will kill you. I just tell you, I ain't going." Then several of Floyd's armed family members began shooting in the tightly packed courtroom. The judge, prosecutor, sheriff, and 2 other people were killed. The governor was unmoved by the request for clemency for Virgie. Governor William Hodges Mann was a former Confederate soldier who served in the Civil War. Mann was badly injured in the Battle of Seven Pines. After he recovered, he became a scout behind enemy lines and was captured by Union forces in 1863 but escaped. Mann was elected Virginia's governor in 1909. Upon taking office, Mann became the last Confederate soldier to serve as governor of Virginia. Governor Mann spoke publicly about the murder. He described it as the most shameful murder in the state's history and that Virgie was a menace and must be executed immediately to ensure public safety. The public safety Mann was referring to was the Jim Crow system put in place after the Civil War. These laws enforced or legalized racial segregation. The governor, and people like him, saw Jim Crow laws as necessary. The governor defended his decision not to give clemency by saying the preservation of the public morals, public health, and public order in the cities and towns of this Commonwealth is endangered by the residence of white and colored people in close proximity to one another. Virgie was executed on August 16, 1912. Virgie's experiences as a household laborer, her murder trial and execution, shows how African Americans, at times, use lethal violence as a survival and resistance strategy against race oppression, labor exploitation, and white violence. At the end of every video, if I can get the killer's birth date, I like to look at their zodiac sign. Virgie was born on August 15, 1895. That makes her a Leo. As soon as I began to read a section of the horoscope called "What Do Leos Hate the Most?" it said, "Leos hate being bossed around." They are very much in charge of their own worlds and their own destiny. Leos are perpetually wounded by the acts of betrayal and abandonment. Their sense of honor is intense. They hold both themselves and others to a very high standard, and they are deeply wounded when someone breaks that code. They hate being told what to do, but if you can get them to listen, they can usually be persuaded, especially if you make them feel like it was what they wanted all along. But they'll always secretly resent that they didn't reach this conclusion alone. Leos don't like to be told to do things, and they especially don't like being forced. They demand respect, and they don't take kindly to people who don't respect them. These characteristics explains why Virgie flipped out on Ida. Imagine having tobacco spit poured on you and being hit and called horrible names. That is too much for a Leo. That's all for today's episode of Women That Kill. I'm Angela, and thanks for watching. Come back tomorrow for more interesting historical facts. Ciao.